when you're getting ready to do that first take, like, it's pretty darn exciting. It should be. Like, let's do it. What if we get it on this first take? Wouldn't it be amazing? What fun. And why couldn't you? What you have just as good a chance of stepping up to the dartboard and throwing a bullseye the first time as you do the 10th time.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Today's episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is sponsored by Roswell Pro Audio, maker of handcrafted microphones in California. Inspired design and impeccable attention to detail will help you capture a gorgeous vintage sound without the vintage price tag. Check out their beautiful line of microphones at roswellproaudio.com. Sending your music to be mastered can be scary, but sending your music to a total stranger for mastering can be really scary. Chris Graham is a Billboard chart-breaking mastering engineer with thousands of credits and knows how to make your record sound fantastic. But more importantly, he understands that there is one person that really knows what a great record sounds like, and that's you, rock stars. So if you're thinking about hiring professional mastering, but not sure if it's right for you, go to chrisgrahammastering.com and get a free sample mastering of your song. Go find out just how great your record can sound at chrisgrahammastering.com. Just click the link included in the show notes. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is multi-Grammy winning producer, engineer, mixer Jim Scott, joining us from Skype from California. Jim has worked with many artists since his start with Sting's Dream of the Blue Turtles 3 decades ago. His discography lists over 200 credits on his website, including the Dixie Chicks, Tom Petty, the Rolling Stones, Crowded House, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Ron Sexsmith, Styx, Foo Fighters, Johnny Cash, Rage Against the Machine, Santana, Wilco, many records with Wilco, Lucinda Williams, and many more. So many great records, I had to stop writing them down so we could start focusing on a few. Jim has recorded and mixed records with Rick Rubin and has also worked with our previous guest, Richard Dodd, on Tom Petty's Wildflowers. And in 2006, he built Plyrz Studio in Valencia, California, to create an inviting space to make music with a classic Neve 8048 console, walls of colorful tapestries adorning rooms full of vintage instruments. And another guest recently, Dana Manning, previously on the show, described Jim as having an incredible collection of recording gear and microphones. Today, we're going to dive into questions about many of these classic albums that Jim has produced, engineered, and mixed, and just how he got such wonderful sounds. Thank you also to Ken Sluter for connecting us. I'm very excited to have Jim Scott joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Jim, welcome to the show, man. Are you ready to rock?
Absolutely. I'm totally ready to rock. That's the first thing I do every morning.
Yeah, man. You kind of help establish what rock sounds like for many of us, I think.
What? Hey, what are you talking about?
You've made a lot of great rock records. You've made really fantastic sounding albums.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, you know what? I feel like I learn from the best, and I've been lucky enough to work with great rock artists. So it's more about them than it is about me, believe me.
Well, groovy. Well, I've given sort of a brief introduction. Tell us a little bit more about how you got into this. You had a chance to work with great artists. I know you must have been recording earlier than Sting's Dream of the Blue Turtles, but that was one of the credits that was mentioned as an early yeah. First engineering gig for you.
Well, I think anybody that's interested in recording just finds a way to do it. And they usually start, I don't think anybody really knows how records are made until they start recording. And I was a kid in a band in high school, and we played shows, and we had band practice, and we made songs, and we wanted to make tape recorders had been invented. So we had a little 2-track tape recorder, and we put up a microphone in the rehearsal room and recorded ourselves. And that's, there you are. You're recording music, and from there it just goes. Let's make them sound better, and let's be a better band, and let's get a better mic, and let's get a better room, and let's drag our stuff all over town and record our little shows. And so I was that guy. I was the guy with the tape recorder and the mic cables and the PA, and it was it started when I was a kid, when I was a young teenager. I wanted to record my band.
So what was your instrument when you were playing in a band? Were you a guitar player, drummer, bass player?
I was a drummer. I was I grew up in the 60s, and like a lot of kids, when I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was, young people can do this. It wasn't like watching, the old, the artists that my parents liked. It was finally, the television brought the Beatles into everybody's living room, and it was like, those guys aren't that much older than me. They're certainly not as old as my parents. I think I could do that.
That's wild.
So I became a drummer.
It's sort of a classic story of discovery of rock and roll with the Beatles coming onto the television set, but it's so great to hear that story repeatedly from different people. What was one of your first recording experiences? Were you in Los Angeles growing up?
No, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, no kidding. I'm St. Louis and myself in parts. I went to Washington University.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. My mom worked at Washington University. She was a secretary for the dean of the architecture school.
Oh, no kidding.
And one of the great advantages of her job is there were some scholarship opportunities, some tuition exchange opportunities for my brothers and I to use because of her job. So when I graduated high school, I went out to California to go to college, and was able to just sort of go out and seek my fortune and try to get in a band and try to keep a college deferment so that I didn't really want to go into the military and go to Vietnam. So I decided that maybe my path would be to get an education and stay in college and hope that the war ended, while I was in college. And fortunately that is what happened.
Did you know John Hartford from St. Louis, also the musician?
I don't think I did.
Okay. He was a Nashville staple banjo player and just wrote many great songs. Anyway, that's an aside. But you went out to California and...
Yeah, I went out to California and I tried to become a drummer in some bands, and I realized that I was terrible at drumming. And it was a whole different level of, it's like going from little league to, semi-pro. It was like these guys were grown men who were going to they were full-time musicians, and I was just a kid with a drum set. So I didn't exactly get discouraged, but I realized that I never really learned how to play the drums. I just played them. And that was fine when you were in high school, but I didn't have any training, and I didn't really know how to read music or count or anything. So I just thought, that's okay. I don't need to be a drummer in a band, but I just tried to figure out a way that I could still stay around music. And I did that by, joining up with a group of musicians who we sort of became like the it band at college for a few years. We played all the parties, and we played all the dances, and we played all the fraternity parties and everything like that. And I became like the front of house guy. Basically, I bought a big PA and a bunch of mics, and we just decided that we wanted to sound really good. So we mic'd everything, and in the early 70s, it was complicated for the time. We were a little ahead of the curve, because you look at photographs of even the big bands, the big famous bands, and you look at the equipment that they were using to put on concerts in the early 70s, and we had just as good a stuff, if not better, than famous groups. We had a lot of. I had a bunch of sub mixers and a bunch of microphones, and I wanted to put a mic on everything, and we did. So it was. We just wanted it to sound good, and we thought it would sound better if we were able to, control, if we were able to mix it.
Yeah. I remember seeing pictures of the Rolling Stones touring with a Shure Vocal Master,
Yeah, exactly. And there's some good pictures of Buffalo Springfield and that kind of thing with, old Voice of the Theater cabinets on each side of the stage and, and a 4-channel mixer.
That's cool. Now, you weren't still using tube gear at that point for live stuff, were you? Or was it transitioning?
Yeah, we had, we took out a loan and went to the Guitar Center and bought an acoustic PA, Corporation. They made an 8-channel mixer and these great folded horn, big speakers. So we ended up buying 2 of them so we could have 16 channels because that's what we figured we needed to do our show. Yeah. And I just ran 2 separate PAs. I put all the instruments in one and all the vocals and the other stuff in the other one.
Wow.
And then I was able to kind of use them as, sub masters and sub mixers. And it was just a way to get more channels. And the 8-channel mixer was the biggest one we could find. So
it's sort of funny because it's funny because you might at first instinct think, oh, that doesn't sound like the right way to do it. But on the other hand, it probably sounded a lot better because the PA systems weren't fighting to share all the space with all those sounds, Yeah,
and there was plenty of power. Yeah. I tell you what, we got shut down more than once because we were too loud, too late.
Nice. Well, cool. So you kind of went from there and must have ended up in the studio somewhere. Did you have sort of a first studio gig somewhere?
I did. The band that I was with, I was not performing with them. I was sort of like the problem solver and the front of house mixer, kind of the producer and kind of just the argument, the vote of like somebody wanted to play a certain thing and somebody else wanted to play something else. And they would ask me what I thought, which one sounds better. And then my vote would be the one that we would usually use. So, how bands are. It's like everybody wants a little bit more me. And sometimes that's not right. So I was able to help solve problems, and my job was to listen and make decisions. So and then also to mix. So that was cool. And the guys thought it would be important because we were trying to make demos in our little garage space with a 2-track tape recorder, and they thought it would be good if I actually had some training. So I went to in Los Angeles at that time. I think it was 1971. There was the Sherwood Oaks Experimental College, which was a free college.
Wow.
And they had a recording engineering program, and I enrolled and I went, and there was a studio in Hollywood whose name escapes me now, but they had an 8-track tape recorder and a real studio, and we learned some theory and we learned about some microphones, and we actually, I brought my band in as my demo project. So for this one semester, I took a recording class and recorded my band in a real recording studio, a real like 1971 era recording studio. And it was a lot of fun. And then a little later on, our band was getting a little bit noticed, and we got an opportunity to go make a record. We got signed to a bad record deal, and we we went in to make a record and we actually went to ID Sound, which was I think it's called Rusk now. It's on La Brea, still there. And Bill Lazarus was our recording engineer, which was unbelievable because he's one of the best recording engineers ever. And so we did some recordings in there, and when we got into a real studio with a real guy, I just thought it was amazing and was trying to figure out, well, maybe that's something that would help me, or maybe it's something that I could do. And funny enough, at the end of our recording session, Bill Lazarus offered me a job. So I worked a summer, I think summer of like 72. I worked, as a sort of a runner, assistant engineer at this little recording studio in Hollywood, and did a bunch of sessions and just sort of saw how real records were really made. And I learned a lot, I learned, just I learned how hard a work it is, and you have to be willing to stay up late. But I also realized how much fun it was. And I also realized that, sometimes you got to play it 10 times to get it right. That was a sort of eye-opening thing. But,
yeah. I think that's one of the first things I noticed in the studio is just how much effort people were putting into trying to get it right, As an early band, you play it once and you're like, that was pretty great. And then you hear it back and it's so exciting. You're done.
Yeah. Well, it took me a long time to learn how to listen to understand, like, what's the difference between the two performances that I just heard? Why is this one, because at some time you think like, well, that sounds good. What's wrong with that one? That one's good. What's wrong? Why are they doing it 10 times? I'm sitting in the back of the room and they're playing the guitar solo over and over. And it's like, what are they listening for? What's wrong? It all sounds good to me, but that's just sort of comes with experience. And you learn a lot about where the groove is, and you learn a lot about where the notes are and where the tone is, and just understanding like how much talent you have in front of you. Sometimes your talent in front of you has limitations, and you still got to figure out how to make it great. And sometimes it takes you more than one try.
Yeah, indeed. I don't know why this popped in my head, but I was thinking sometimes also the talent in front of you probably exceeds your ability to listen at first.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, I hope that some of my early clients don't hear this podcast, but I mixed records for a long time. I would say that I mixed records for probably 5 or 6 years, like real records with real budgets and real artists, before I could really hear what I was trying to hear.
Yeah.
It took me that long to relax into my ability to just mix music and not try so hard and not be basically insecure about, the rhythm section balance or the drum sound or how loud it's a certain amount of, maybe my learning curve was long. Maybe some people get it quicker than me, but I know for a fact that I mixed records for a long time before I knew how to mix.
Yeah. Interesting. I like hearing that, because I think that those things you mentioned, the rhythm section balance, the vocal level, those are all classic struggles for all of us mixing. And it's interesting to hear you describe it almost as like that's an initial worry, but once you learn how to relax into it, you stop thinking about those things quite so much.
Yeah. Sadly, I listened to some of those early records, and boy, the snare drum is really loud. Sounds really good. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, for the rest of us, we all go like, man, I sure do love that snare drum on that record.
Yeah. But that's not really not what it's about.
Yeah.
At least not anymore for me. I'm kind of a song guy and a performance guy and an emotion guy. And it's a lot less about the kick and the snare.
Nice.
These days.
Well, I like to ask guests to share an inspirational quote going into the podcast. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us? I mean, I suspect that most of what you're going to say will be an inspirational quote to me, but if you got anything you want to share.
Well, I mean, the one quote that comes to mind, and it's there's a really famous and still very active record producer who used to work at the record plant where I worked. His name is John Boylan. And John Boylan was a great record producer and a manager. He produced Linda Ronstadt, and he produced Boston, and
nice.
The list. His list is long, long, long. Believe me. And he told me one time when I was janitoring at the record plant, he said, Jim, sloppy records are made in sloppy studios, and it just stuck with me because he's kind of right. And when I was working at the record plant, our vibe was that it was supposed to be the best and most comfortable and just the most amazing studio in the world. And that was what we all went for. So, the attention to detail was deep. All the pencils had to be sharpened. All the light bulbs had to work. It had to be clean and spotless. And track sheets had to be nice and neat. And they had if the engineer didn't like the way you wrote on the track sheet, he would say, go practice your printing. I can't read what you're writing. Go. And so it sounds a little silly now, but at the same time, it sort of stuck with me. And I, especially these days with all the file management problems. Mm-hmm. And if you don't keep things nice and neat, you got a big mess. And when you got a big mess, it's slower, it's more cumbersome. I bet, stuff gets lost. So that's my quote. Sloppy records are made in sloppy studios, and I give all credit to John Boylan.
That's good. That's good. And, it makes me think of, in science, there's the idea that everything tends towards entropy, and which is, like disorganization. And it takes effort for us to create organization and organize things. But same idea in the studio. It's like, I think every studio I've ever been in, like there is no studio in the world that doesn't have to fight dust bunnies behind the cables, that mm-hmm. are trying desperately to to get in there. And yet at the same time, every studio needs to have some form of, the antithesis of sloppiness, whether it's sharpened pencils or just being organized or just being able to know where your stuff is in the studio. Well, how are some ways that you keep your place, Plyrz, in shape and sort of fight that entropy?
Well, my studio is it's a really large space. I got 5,000 square feet. I mean, it's an enormous building, and inside of the building, I have a big warehouse that has all my equipment and a bar and a kitchen, and then I have another separate recording studio with a couple rooms, and there's a whole upstairs, and I mean, it's a couple of bathrooms. So honestly, I'm just over there all the time making it better. I'm over there all the time, cleaning it, just as you would. I'm the janitor, so I make sure the bathrooms are nice, and I dust off all the keyboards so that if somebody sits down to play, and one of the pianos or one of the keyboards or something, that it's not all dusty. And I vacuum I vacuum almost every day, just the same way I was. That was my full-time job when I went to work at the record plant. I was a janitor, and I'm still the janitor at my studio. But if you just sort of stay on it, if you just sort of it takes a minute, but just do the dishes at the end of the night. It's the same. It's the same thing like being at home. Take the trash out. Wipe off the counter. It's clean up the console, stack up the papers. Throw away the trash, empty the trash cans. It's freshen things up, and so it's nice. So the next morning when you walk in ready to work, it's like, yeah, let's go. It's not a big mess.
Do you still deal with that typical session dynamic where things get pretty busy and kind of cluttered during tracking, and then you sort of neaten up afterwards? Are you always, negotiating that balance of cables all over the place?
Well, I'm very lucky that my place, I'm basically the only person that works there, and it's it's big, like a real recording studio, but because it's my place, so I can kind of leave some things sort of secretly set up all the time. So it's not like walking into an empty room and saying, okay, where are we going to put the drums today? Where are we going to put the bass cabinet? And where, how many people need headphone boxes? Some of that stuff is already sort of set up. And so it stays reasonably neat. And if things get a little crazy, like if we start moving quick, like, we got to set up for a quick horn overdub, and then we got to do a violin overdub, and then we got to have these background singers come in. Sometimes it gets a little messy, but it's you just sort of stay with it and just make sure that nobody trips over anything or has to walk over your stuff. That's the hard part. It's just keeping stuff out of the doorways and keeping cables from getting crushed or pinched. And it's like I'm lucky enough that when I built the place, it has a tendency to stay organized and stay clean the way I have it set up. And it's easier to solve a problem. Like if something goes down, it's easier to find where the problem is instead of just like you have a big mess of spaghetti. It's really not that way. Things are labeled. Things are labeled up, and it's nice.
What are some differences that you've discovered? I mean, maybe you just described it, but anything more you want to add between working in a place where things are pre-set up and you go to work versus studios where it's always a blank slate every time you start a session?
I think most people have their spot. That's what's happened to the music business. Everybody's got their spot now. Everybody has a workspace where they, sit in front of their computer and have some microphones. I think it's rare. Like the old days, the only way you could make a recording was to have the opportunity to go to a recording studio. Mm-hmm. And now people don't have to have that approval. They can just make records because they go to Guitar Center and buy a computer and a microphone. But I remember in the old days, before I was established, when I would travel all over the country from one crummy studio to the next crummy studio, trying to, produce and engineer and mix these bands in their hometown because it was cheaper to fly me than it was to fly a whole band. And that's still true. But, you just go in there and if it's a clean slate, then you have the opportunity. You still got to set it up, and you have a choice. Are you going to run a cable right across the center of the floor, or are you going to run it around the corner, run it behind the drum riser? It's sort of up to you. If you could just sort of look ahead and just not, if you don't make a big mess, then you don't have a big mess. And sometimes it's just easier to, use less and keep it simple, just so that people are just comfortable, make them comfortable, make sure everybody's got a chair and make sure everybody's got a headphone that works. And, you give them the opportunity to be comfortable.
It takes a lot of effort and time to set up everything from scratch for sessions. And I imagine that when you're pre-set up in your own place, it's kind of nice to just be able to get right down to making music and skip some of that.
Well, we can get to it quickly, and we have to. There's no drum day anymore. There's no let's get drum sounds. We're going to get drum sounds, and it's going to take about 10 minutes instead of 10 hours. It's just how the industry has evolved. Everything has to move much quicker, and bands need to perform better, quicker, because they literally don't have enough money to spend very much time in a studio. They gotta move it.
You had made a comment earlier about the difference between, the days of spending 3 days on a mix are in the past, and you like to work more quickly. Can you talk a little bit about your process of making records there? I think you had mentioned, mixing many songs in a day and mixing quickly. And is everything super recallable and all that kind of stuff? Do you have those stacks and reams of recall paperwork at the end, or is that all in the past as well?
That's kind of all in the past. I mean, there was a time, of course, when even on SSL consoles that had, the fantastic total recall, you could have total recall. Every knob, you could get it back to the exact same spot. And that's, I think that was great. But you still had, analog outboard gear, and sometimes a lot of it. And so you had to document all that stuff. And it was hours and hours of people's lives wasted, documenting that kind of stuff. So what I've observed in my experience now with my studio, I'm on an analog console. I'm on an old Neve 8048. Mm-hmm. I have Pro Tools, but Pro Tools is just my recording medium. I don't really use Pro Tools like most people do. It's just kind of just a tape recorder for me. I don't use any plugins, and I don't mix in the box, and I don't, I actually use as little of Pro Tools as possible because I just think that the Neve console sounds better, and my outboard gear sounds better. The real equipment to me sounds better than pictures of equipment, and I'm lucky that I have real equipment. It's not a moral judgment. It's just what I have. And so I don't need to use, a picture of a compressor. I'll use a real compressor. And so the bands that I produce and engineer and mix, we start mixing on tracking day. I set up my chain. I set up my console so that the drums and the rhythm section and that all, the stuff that you're tracking on the first day, it comes up through my console in the same channels that I'm probably going to mix it on. So I can start processing, I like to get a nice big fat drum sound naturally, but on mixing day, I think everybody would say, well, there's a couple of little things I might like to do on mixing day, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little compression, a little EQ, a little side chain, this and that, Mm-hmm. And I start doing all that as we're tracking. It's part of the sound. I mean, I know that the kick drum, for example, is nice and deep and wide and fat and good, but on mixing day, your instinct might be let's just add a little bit of thud to it. Let's add a little bit of whack to it, And so I can add that little bit of this and that to everything as I'm tracking and mixing all at the same time. And honestly, when the band comes in for a playback, it sounds a lot more like a record than just a tape or just a recording or just like a start, like we get pretty far down the line. I mean, I think it should sound a lot like a record when they come in for the first playback. It gives them a lot of confidence, and it gives them, it's like, wow, it sounds good in here. Wow, this is going to be easy. So I think that's really important to instill that kind of confidence in your artists, so they're comfortable and they're confident, and at the same time, we got to get on with this. We're going to be tracking and overdubbing and comping and mixing this all very, very quickly. And so we will work quickly, and it has to sound good all the time.
Roswell Pro Audio brings you microphone design that is out of this world. Endorsed by a growing list of artists and producers like Phil Collen of Def Leppard, Ross Hogarth, who's recorded Van Halen, Ziggy Marley, and the Doobie Brothers, and Supa Dupes, working with Drake, Mary J. Blige, and Eminem. These are all rock stars that have discovered just how great Roswell microphones sound. Check out the Mini K47, which uses a capsule modeled on the one in the vintage U47 at a street price of only $299. Or the beautiful Delphos condenser microphone with a capsule tuned like the vintage U67 with great clarity and far lower noise at a street price of only $899. In fact, you are hearing my voice right now on the beautiful Delphos microphone. These mics are carefully crafted by hand and immediately feel good even before you plug them in and hear how great they sound. These are well-built microphones that will last you and your studio a lifetime of great recording. Check out more audio examples of these awesome mics at roswellproaudio.com. Are you having trouble getting your mixes to sound professional? Are you mixing and mastering yourself? Did you know that the vast majority of the world's best mix engineers almost never master their own mixes? So if you're thinking about hiring a professional mastering engineer, check out Chris Graham Mastering. Chris is a Billboard chart-breaking mastering engineer who has mastered thousands of songs for both professional and home studio clients just like you. Send one of your songs to Chris and he'll master a sample of your song for free. If you decide to hire him, you can also get a free video mix consultation before mastering to help you get the most out of your mix. To learn more, check out chrisgrahammastering.com or just click the link in the show notes. So if you don't mind, can I geek out on some questions about that with you?
Yeah.
For example, when you're getting the tracking setup going and you've got drums mic'd up, I imagine you're doing some EQing and compression possibly to the drums on their way into Pro Tools, and then Pro Tools comes back to your console and it's laid out on the faders, and then there's some additional treatments going on. Do you use things like parallel compression? Is that a good way to get the drums to come to life?
Yeah. The way I was trained, the way I learned at the record plant and just in my own experience, a long time ago, 24 tracks seemed like a lot of tracks. It was like, well, that's how many there are, so that's how many we're going to use. So, the kick drum is going to just get one track. It's not going to get 2 or 3 tracks. It's going to get one. And the snare drum's going to get one track. And then the drum set would sometimes just go down on 2 tracks. So it was common to have kick, snare, drums. And then if you had extra tracks, you might print a room mic if you didn't just print that into the...
Yeah.
So you would combine. The point is, I combine, if I put multiple microphones on something, like 2 mics on the kick drum or 2 mics on the snare drum or 2 mics on a guitar amp, I commit to a balance and print it on one track. I don't need to print both microphones, change my mind later. I have, because of the console that I have and the combining network, the buses that come out of the console, I can combine things to one track, and I do all the time because I think it sounds better. And once you commit to a sound, then every time you push that fader up, you get it's the same. That's your sound.
Yeah.
Good for better or worse. That's it. That's what you got. It's not like, wow, gee, I wish I had more of the sub kick mic that I recorded a month ago. Well,
right.
Well, you should have thought of that a month ago. It's like, figure it out. So yeah, definitely. There's if you really analyze what you're doing and really analyze what a compressor is and analyze what an equalizer is, they're basically all instruments and tools which affect the volume of something. It's volume. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. So if you want some more volume out of the top frequencies, then you turn up the treble on your equalizer. And if you want some more volume out of something, you can, you put a compressor on it so it evens out the volume. So basically, all problems in the studio are solved with some sort of volume. Turn it up or turn it down, or pan it to one side or the other so that you can hear it, which is just another description of volume. You know, I can't hear it, or it's too loud. That's most of what people talk about. You know, they want to just hear it.
Yeah.
And there's a million ways, but it all kind of boils down to volume. So you can just, taking that as a starting point, all the sidechain compression and compression in general and equalizing in general is all just another tool to allow you to hear it. And the tricks that we know now about how to make records sound the way we want them to sound have evolved over a long time. You know, parallel compression is not new. I used to work for a great recording engineer producer named Lee DiCarlo, and also another great, sadly gone now, great producer, Andy Johns. Those were kind of my mentors at the record plant. Those two guys, I worked with them as an assistant engineer, and they would, they used they used compressors as like reverbs. They would take a send from the console into the compressor and out of the compressor and back into the console just as a return, just like you would a reverb or a delay or anything. And then they would just pile stuff into it, put the kick and the bass into one compressor, and they lock together and they glue together and they tighten up, and so just experiment with that left and right with stereo compressors or mono ones left, right, and center. Some of that is just easy. It's just sort of it's just sort of a sound. The sound that we've come, I think people are actually using less compression now than they used to. You listen to some 60s records, they're compressed to death. The Beatles especially, but in a most beautiful and wonderful way.
Yeah. Fewer things compressed too.
Fewer things compressed, digital compression is a little dangerous, and I don't really understand it, but I know when I like it and when I don't like it. But, of course, the way to mix things quickly is to record them the way you want to hear them and not have to fix everything in the mix. There's the fix it in the mix is sort of a joke these days. Like, you don't have time to fix it in the mix. The mixing should be really simple because it should sound good all the time. And then the mixing is just a balance. So kind of the roundabout answer to your question is, the stuff that I produce up at my place, I can mix 2 or 3 songs a day because I'm familiar with it and I kind of know what it should sound like. And when we open up the Pro Tools file and it comes back up through the same channels, it already sounds familiar.
Yeah.
And it's not a lot of mystery. And then it's just making a nice balance and just making sure everything's, got the right touch on it, and then print it. And then there's no recall for me. There's no scientific recall. There's no total recall. There's no in the box, that kind of thing. And people want to know.
There's no robot recall.
No, there's no robot recall. But, honestly, if, with no disrespect to anyone, but a little bit of a tiny thing is a little bit of a tiny thing that you may or may not hear the next time you hear that playback. And it could sound different in another stereo. It could sound different in your girlfriend's car. It could sound different when you're walking through Walmart and hear it coming through the speakers. So when you're focused in on little tiny things and they become really, really important, that's a really dangerous time of the record because you can waste a lot of time on stuff that really isn't very important. And, that being said, if the mix is terrible, just do it again. You could do it again quicker than you can writing it all down and recalling it. Why would you want to recall a terrible mix? Just like you start over, just do it again. Spend another couple hours with a fresh energy and just make it better. Listen to the old mix and just beat it. What's so hard? Just like, you want more bass, turn it up. You want it louder, turn it up. Come on.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
You make a good point. It's like, why go for a system that is going to incrementally bring up things in something that was uninspiring to you in the first place when you can make a much bigger change by just remixing it? Yeah.
And honestly, if you just use your ears, I can switch, if you have that kind of capability in your studio, just listen to the old mix and then listen to the new mix. And the new mix should sound better. Just do it. Just make it better. If you can't beat the old mix, then everybody's got to like decide how bad is it. Maybe it's good.
Now, do you, when you're remixing, keep the old mix right in front of you somehow so that you can check yourself against it? Is that part of a process that's helpful?
Well, I do. I don't always. I certainly have that capability. I usually have I try to make a rough mix every night at the end, or every time we do something on a song. I try to make a rough mix just so people can understand what work has been done. You know, I can't remember. Did we put the guitar solo in that song?
Right.
I don't remember. I have to.
That's good to hear you say that. I thought it was just me.
No, there's a lot of details, and you're working quickly. And sometimes, did we put the background, or So I do keep an updated rough mix, and I think my clients like that too. We can, give them a CD at the end of the night, or send it to a Dropbox, or send them an MP3 or something, so that they can stay included. And sometimes those roughs get pretty good. And if on mixing day, it is kind of fun to just be able to switch back and forth. Like, there's the old mix and here's the new mix. And if you listen to the old mix for a second, you might go, oh, that's right. Yeah, I got to do that. I forgot about that. Yeah, that would be cool. And sometimes, usually, hopefully, and most of the time, after a few minutes, the new mix is sounding way better than the rough mix, because the rough mixes are rough. I don't spend much time on them. They just, it's just the working mix of what you're listening to at that moment. Right. And then when you actually take an hour or two and concentrate on the mix and just the mix and not the performance of something that's going into the rough mix, it's, you're just doing what you're supposed to do. You just take inventory and you go up and down through the parts and back and forth through the levels and get it right and print it, done.
Nice. Well, Jim, I've got a few of your records listed here and a few questions I thought I might ask you about some different things, and maybe we should just jump right in and see what comes of it. So let's just go down the list here. One of the records that I mentioned was working with Sting, doing Dream of the Blue Turtles. Any memories from that you want to share with us about that record making process?
Well, it was my first record that I engineered as the first engineer. Like, I'd been in the business for a couple years. I'd worked at the record plant. I'd been on the road a lot with the recording trucks. And I met the producer, guy named Pete Smith, who was a young engineer himself in England. He had done some demos with Sting. And one thing led to another, and Sting hired him to produce the Dream of the Blue Turtles. So I had done a project with Pete, and we had become friends. I was his assistant on a short project with the police. And Pete called me up out of the blue, and he said, hey, do you want to engineer this record? I'm going to produce Sting. You want to engineer it for me? So it's like, yeah, absolutely. So we went it was in Eddie Grant's studio in Barbados. And so we fly down there, and it was, I got to say, I was pretty terrified. I'm a pretty confident person, but I did not have very much experience making records. I was a great assistant engineer, and you really couldn't throw me too many curveballs that I couldn't hit. I was comfortable with my job as the assistant, which was a lot of patching and a lot of punching and a lot of synchronizing. And, I was comfortable with the equipment and my abilities, and I was competent with being the punch-in guy on the tape recorder, if people know what punching in is anymore.
Yeah, right.
But we got down to Barbados, and it was just Sting and Pete and I for the first couple of days, and I didn't really hit it off. I'm not sure Sting was really he was trying to write some songs and trying to understand how to work his new Fairlight computer, and the studio needed it was a different kind of synchronizers for the two tape recorders, and just understanding how, every studio is different, and understanding everything about it. And there wasn't like a maintenance department really. So it was I was kind of on my own, and it was my job to, figure it out. So I was figuring things out, and got a little insecure in some of that. I was sitting in there going, man, in a little bit over my head here. But once the band showed up and we actually started recording, everything got good, because, I was actually better with a busier, more complicated room was actually easier for me than a really simple, like, sitting there with Sting and his computer was pretty terrifying. But a room full of guys playing music was simple.
Because you sort of know what needs to happen next.
Yeah, you do. You just are. You're just in it. You're actually making music. I wasn't then, and I'm certainly not now very much of a computer guy. So I wasn't a big help with the Fairlight with Sting, and he wasn't either. And we didn't have anybody to explain it to us. So we're all reading the manual, trying to figure out how to synchronize it and how to like loop it and how to make patterns. And he needed to write some songs, and instead of writing them on his guitar or a piano or something, he was trying to use this Fairlight to basically, he was trying to like record his song, at least the chord sequence, in the computer with some sounds and some atmosphere, and it was all complicated, and we couldn't figure it out.
So the Fairlight was an early sequencer synthesizer, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
but just for the anecdotal value of it, can you let us know what a Fairlight probably cost back at that time? Because wasn't it a rather expensive piece of gear?
Oh, I don't know for sure, but I'm thinking it was a big commitment, probably in the $40,000 to $50,000 range.
Wow.
Take a wild guess, and it was huge. It came over these two like giant racks of computers, and I really couldn't. I'm just not interested in that. I don't know why. I mean, I'm just not. I'm more of an analog guy. Give me a drum set and some guitar amps and a piano and an organ, and I'm pretty happy. But things that you can't open up and see inside of, I don't know. I don't know what to do with. I don't know what to do with that. Well, I'm sorry.
Something that I sort of noticed making records over time was the difference between working with musicians who are playing together and the computer overdub scenario where it's like human versus the computer. And I think it just occurred to me one day that music to me is people communicating with each other. And that happens when you got a room full of musicians, which I really appreciate.
Yeah. Well, it's fun. I'll tell you what, it's like, I don't know, how many, I was kind of a sports guy when I was in high school and college, and I've been on a lot of different kind of sports teams and, played, different games like that. And there's a real camaraderie when you have, a team, and you're winning or losing, you work with the guys you got, and some guys are better than others, and some guys you can count on, and some guys you can't, or then maybe, or another kind of thing. It's like if you're in a relationship with a person, and, there's good times and there's bad times, and all these different feelings, but there is never the feeling of being in a band, playing great music with a great feel and everyone going together at the same time, or even being not in the band, but in the room recording them. That is a singular, unique feeling and an experience, which I think only happens at that moment.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun at that moment. And a great example of that to me, and where I learned that. I didn't learn it in any of my bands because we weren't very good, and we didn't really we never really caught the wave. But if you haven't seen the movie The Last Waltz in a long time, it's there's just some great shots of the band at that Thanksgiving concert, just playing their music so naturally, and the camera shot down the line, and they're all late getting to the mic, and the groove is funky, but it just makes such a beautiful sound, and you can just tell that they're, no matter how loose and how crazy it got, they were still in that groove, and they could not get out of it. It's like if you didn't get to the mic, it didn't matter because it was still a beautiful sound. And it's just I saw every time I watch that movie, I just am reminded of what a beautiful feeling it is when there's a band playing a groove that you just cannot get out of. And if you're lucky enough to get that on your tracking date with your band that you're producing, your job is so much easier, because if you got a groove, you got everything.
That's cool. And talking about capturing the moment, it's the moment of having the musicians together in the studio, but there's also this sort of like thing that happens in tracking sessions where there's a a heightened moment where the band and the music and the song just comes together, and you just recorded it, and if you happen to feel like you had all the, the compressors and the EQs and the mic pre's all dialed in just right, it's such a rewarding, wonderful moment, like it's a snapshot of that best take.
Yeah. And that happens. It doesn't happen all the time. I always, it's one of my, I don't have a lot of material, but I got some shtick that I try to, some things are usually pretty funny. So I try to hit it with it. But one thing, I try to say to everybody is like, you only get one shot at a first take. And when you're getting ready to do that first take, like, it's pretty darn exciting. It should be like, let's do it. What if we get it on this first take? Wouldn't that be amazing? What fun. And why couldn't you? What you have just as good a chance of stepping up to the dartboard and throwing a bullseye the first time as you do the 10th time.
I probably have a better chance.
So you might as well try to throw it the first time.
The 10th time, I've already finished a pint by that point too. So. What about that moment where you're in record and the band's about to perform? Are there any rituals, or do you have any advice around how you communicate and interact with the band so that you don't make them all nervous as you press record?
Well, these days with the computer, we're kind of always in record. So when there's no like wait for me, we're not trying to save tape here. We're always in record. So the band really never has to worry about missing, the front of the song or anything like that. And they shouldn't, because that's not their job. Their job is to play. But yeah, it's exciting. It's when we're really, really ready. It's like, let's go. But that reminds me, speaking of, not being ready, if you listen to the Dream of the Blue Turtles, there's a song on there called Love is the Seventh Wave. Mm-hmm. And it starts with a little, like a DX7 sort of a keyboard sound. And I didn't catch the front of the song. I was over on the other side of the room and I heard him counting off, and I dove over to the tape recorder just as he said 4, and the tape recorder started just as the guy started playing the keyboard. So the keyboard actually ramps up as the tape recorder is dropping into record instead of it's
love that
supposed to go 1, 2, 3, 4, dun, 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 dun. And I missed 1, 2, 3, 4, and I got there just as he started the keyboard. So it goes.
That's great.
So can never do it again.
And
never
I love that with guitar bands. When you're doing a rock record, when you hear that like of the guitar entering, that's a great sound. I miss that with Pro Tools and digital. It's one of the nice things about tape.
Yeah.
Well, so let's see. Another band that you worked with that is definitely a group of musicians playing together is Wilco. And I'm embarrassed to say that I actually, before I got ready for this, I didn't realize you had done all these Wilco records. So I was really tickled to see that. Talk about working with those guys and how you got involved with them. You've done a number of records with them, right?
Yeah, been a few, The first one I worked on was I did some mixing on their second album, Being There. I think my job was to mix one song. They wanted a single mixed, and I can't remember which song it was, but so they sent the tapes, and I did a mix. I think we scheduled 2 days of studio time for me to do the one song, and nobody came to attend the mix. The instructions were that I was going to make a mix and then make a cassette and put it in. There used to be this thing called the Midnight Flyer. You could take something down to the airport and they would fly it to a city. It was sort of like an overnight delivery. It wasn't FedEx or anything. It was some other thing. So
you go to the checkout counter for Southwest and you just deliver it to them by hand or something, right?
Yeah. So I did a mix and I made a cassette and I put it in the Midnight Flyer. And the next morning I go to the studio and I get a call like, "This is great. We love this. This is perfect. How many more songs can you mix today?" And so I don't remember how many more days we worked, but I think I mixed 6 songs on that record, and it was fun. I mean, I think a lot of great songs on there, and I think I might have mixed what the record company thought was the singles or the highlights or or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of that record is, rough mixes that, and that's cool. I mean, it's just a mix. What is a rough mix versus a real mix? There shouldn't be that big a difference. So we got off on a good foot, and then the next one that rolled around was Summer Teeth.
Great record too.
Which was a record that they had recorded all over the country on tour. They would have a day off, and they would ask the road manager, like, where's the closest studio that we can go to? So they went to all these mysterious little studios all over the country and recorded songs. And so by the time the tapes got to me, there was tapes from all over the place. And, back in the day, you had to know what your level was. You needed to be able to align the tape recorders. So you needed to keep tones, and, you would print tones so that you could get back to the same level, so that if you would know that when you turned on your bass channel, it was basically the same level coming back to you in a new studio that you recorded it at the other studio. So that was the science behind having tones. So, they had worked at a bunch of different studios, and a lot of places didn't ever align their tape recorders, and some places just had a house alignment. And so the alignments were all over the place, and there was no science, and it was just, we just put tapes up, and if you look at the tape recorder, if everything was just pegged, like beyond distorted, then you just turn the whole tape recorder down. And so we ended up just mixing things the best we could with very little science involved, or with the limited amount of science that we had on that project. And of course, Jay Bennett was at his heyday with that band. And so it was very complicated, and a lot of parts, and a lot of music. And it was great. It was really fun. We got along great. They were actually in attendance. The whole, the whole original band was in attendance, and we mixed it and we handed it in, and then they said, yeah, it's a great record. We'd like you to record another song. We'd like you to record another, something like a single. So we went back, and we were in the mixing studio that we were in. We set up the band and recorded another song and mixed that one too. And so
where was that? Was that in Chicago, or were they out in LA with you?
we were in LA. We were at what is now East West. I think at that time it was called Ocean Way. It's the 6,000 building. It was Bill Putnam's United Western and Ocean Way and Cello, and now it's East West. So it's a great old studio where I worked for many, many years. Did a lot of my work was done there. I love the place.
Is that where Jack Puig would mix? Is that where I saw his room?
He was in the there were two buildings side by side. He was in the 6050 building. The Wilco was in the 6000 building, and they were both owned by Allen Sides for a while. And I don't know at that time if they both were or not, but the 6000 building, the old United Western, that's the Beach Boys studio and the Frank Sinatra studio and the Wrecking Crew studio, and I did lots and lots of my Rick Rubin stuff there, and
well, it's one of the things that I noticed visiting that studio and then seeing pictures of Plyrz, your studio, is you guys on the West Coast in LA, you got a real appreciation for a good tie-dye tapestry and, really vibing a place out and making it look great.
Well, that was all me. Ocean Way doesn't look like that. It's sort of old and crummy, kind of like Sound City used to be. I used to always decorate all the studios that I went to.
Oh, that's great.
That was me putting it up. I'd go in the night before or at 5 o'clock in the morning on the day of, and I'd put up some tapestries and Christmas lights and light a couple candles. And I think it's supposed to be a little bit of an atmosphere. You don't really want to go to a dentist's office or a waiting room to record your album. Just a little bit of mystery, a little bit of fun, a little bit of incense or something, just to give it a little bit of a vibe. It's not the only thing that's important, but I do think that it is important, and all my clients get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit of a thing. I'm not the only guy that decorates, believe me, but I do my best. I try hard.
Well, so what was it like recording the new single with Wilco? How did you like to set these guys up to make it easy for them to play?
Well, we were in the Beach Boys room, which is just one little room with like one little ISO booth that is just so small. It's like a closet. So, I just sort of set it up, the way the Beach Boys did. You put the piano near the drums so that there's a minimum amount of distance leakage. If the piano is the thing that's going to really pick up the ambience in the room more than anything else, because it's a big instrument and it's a big box and it's got a lot of, it's going to amplify all the frequencies in the room to wherever you put the microphone. So if you want the truest drum sound, you put the piano near the drums. Otherwise, you're going to have when you turn the piano on, you're going to have a really roomy drum sound. So
yeah, interesting. Yeah, I struggle with that in my studio because I have a Grand, and sometimes we cut the drums right next to it, and you quickly realize that the piano mics are drum room mics, and you just have to
they are.
Work with it.
Yeah, well, you have to accept it as a gift. That's the same way we did the Heartbreakers. To try to get the Ben Mont's piano near the drums, and because bands like to play together.
Yeah.
I think the laws of physics can tell you that if you isolate the quiet sounds from the loud sounds, you might get a better recording. And that's why you put a vocalist in a booth if you can, or an acoustic guitar in a booth if you can, because the loud sounds will just, pollute that microphone to the point where you might not be able to use it. So you do have to use some kind of science to make sure that the things you're recording have the proper sound and the proper dynamic that they need. But
yeah,
at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where you put stuff as long as people are playing great.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, I'm glad you brought up the Heartbreakers. So I wanted to ask you if you'd like to share any memories about working with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I know that's a real heartfelt moment right now.
Yeah, it sure is. My heart is broken and my mind is blown. I just can't even believe it happened.
Yeah,
it's too much. It was great. Every minute was great. Tom had just come off making a bunch of big hit records with Jeff Lynne, Into the Great Wide Open, and the hits and the big process sort of sound. And then we got, they hired Rick Rubin. So, Rick and I had been making records for a long time, and Rick's a simple guy, and he's not a real, he doesn't like many of, he talk about liking volume, like that's it. He doesn't doesn't really need effects. He doesn't really need nothing. He just wants to hear it loud and clear. Done. Yeah. If you do that, then he's going to like it. He wants it loud and clear and in your face and simple. So we had our shot at the Heartbreakers, and we were, they were sort of auditioning drummers and trying to figure out what to do. And so we finally, we were recording some demos with different drummers and rhythm sections, and finally, Steve Ferroni and finally got our section together. So we're at Sound City. We're starting the Wildflowers record, and
wow.
And so we recorded a song or two, and Tom didn't really know me, and he didn't know Rick, and nobody, it was kind of like a new cast of characters, and so they were playing something back, and it's bone dry, and it's really loud, and maybe a little compressed. I don't know if it was or wasn't. I don't remember compressing the playbacks, but it was definitely a loud, clear, dry Heartbreakers performance. And
yeah.
I'm sitting there and Rick's sitting there, and Tom just looks at Mike and goes like, "Is this good? Is this sounding good?" And Mike looked at him and just said, "Well, I never heard five guys playing good sound bad."
Interesting.
And that was it. That was it. So that's all he needed to hear. So
how did you feel in that moment?
Well, I mean, I didn't have any expectation for what Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers was supposed to sound like, because I liked all their records. I liked the ones that were processed, and I liked the ones that were unprocessed. And There was sort of a 70s era Tom Petty with, like reverb and that kind of stuff. And then there was the Jeff Lynne kind of drum machine-y kind of synthesizer-y layered kind of ones. But the records that I'd made with Rick, I just knew what Rick wanted. Mm-hmm. And I just knew for me, the quickest way to get to having Rick say, that sounds good, is to just give him what I knew he would, probably want. Like I kind of knew where to start. It wasn't like, I bet Rick is going to like a bunch of effects today. He wasn't that kind of guy. He just wanted to hear it. So I was just trying to do what I normally did to get through my day so that I didn't have to just keep, hammering on sounds and, no, the bass sounds terrible. Like, oh, really? What am I supposed to do about that? Like go invent a new amplifier, go invent you know what I mean? It's like the bass player is playing through an amp and I'm recording it. And how many different mics can you put on it? How much EQ can you put on the bass? Is it really my job to get a bass sound? But, at the same time.
But for clarity's sake, that didn't happen, right?
No.
Right.
Well, it happened once in a while, I guess. But anyway, it wasn't my idea to make it loud and dry. It was just what just kind of what Rick was into.
Yeah.
And me too. I liked it too. I kind of like having no place to hide. I like hearing it. I like hearing all of it.
I like that. I like having no place to hide. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.